Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. First, we'll start with a roll call. Will the clerk please call roll call?
Chairman North,
Here.
Vice Chair Morrison,
Here.
Commissioner Moore,
Here.
Commissioner Sol, Commissioner Garza,
Here.
Commissioner Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Klein.
Here.
Awesome. All right. And we will declare a quorum. All right. Good. Approval of agenda.
Smooth.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Thank you. Do we need to vote on that, or are we good?
Roll call. Let her ride.
Roll call on that. Roll call.
Vice Chair Morrison,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Garza,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Klein,
Yes.
and Chairman North.
Yes. Get an approval of the minutes from our last meeting, the joint study session meeting from June 30th, 2021. If I can have a motion.
I move for approval.
Second.
And we can have a roll call on that, please.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Garza,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Klein,
Yes.
Chairman North,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Morrison.
Yes.
And we will go straight into new business for this meeting, which is request for approval of recommendation to the Clovis City Commission regarding a revision to the Unified Development Ordinance addressing cannabis regulations in the city of Clovis. And with that, I believe we can go right in. Mr. Morris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sent out to each of you by email a proposed ordinance that is loosely drafted based upon our study session last week. And so hopefully each of you have a copy of that along with the maps that Mr. Hewitt and Mr. Howalt prepared showing, kind of giving a visual to some of those distances we talked about. The proposed ordinance is based upon us prescribing certain zones in which establishments can operate in. I did receive some questions about possibly using an overlay district. And so that's definitely something that we can accomplish. I would have to reword what I sent you a little bit. And I believe we have 5 or 6 categories of overlay districts in the UDO. So we would tack on an extra one for cannabis if we wanted to go that route, but it would involve changing the ordinance. But nothing else really to say. I'm happy to field any questions. I think all of you were at the study session either in person or virtually. So I'm happy to answer any questions about what I've drafted or any other questions that come up.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Morris. We'll open it up for questions from the commissioners or comments, discussion, debate.
Mr. Morris, I had a couple things. We mentioned it last time, and maybe it goes under B. I'm good with the 500 foot. We talked about rehab centers, adding that in as language one time too. I don't know if there's a bunch of those around, but
I think some churches have rehabs facilities or
attached to them.
task, yeah.
That's correct. We did talk about that, and I did not put that in the draft ordinance. I don't see that in here.
So,
I know that several of the other cities we looked at had prescribed distances between any rehabilitation center.
would we be considering, back to the church, what is that program? It's slipping my mind right now, sorry.
Celebrate Recovery.
Celebrate Recovery,
Yes,
is that considered?
that's one of them, yes.
Okay. Would we be considering that a rehab sort of situation?
And we could simply, under A, where we define the 300 feet, is add rehabilitation centers in there. And I think that since we also have churches in there, since that program is affiliated with the church.
Kind of covers that.
That we would be covered since it's hosted within a church.
And to answer your question, Mr. Chairman, I would probably want to add, if we're going to add rehabilitation center as a landmark, I'd probably want to add a definition of what that is. So you guys would have to come up with that as well, and it could be any way that you wanted to craft it.
Thank you, Mr. Morris.
And you said that was 500 feet that we were talking from a treatment facility? Is that what?
That's what we talked about last time was 500 foot.
Okay.
I mean, that's a whole nother discussion once we get into these distances, which I can start off or we can pass for now. Real quick, the only other thing we talked about was days of the week. Maybe that's under the hours section.
So I just worded it where there are no day restrictions, so it's 7 days a week, holidays, all calendar days. The only restrictions are on the hours.
Okay.
But we can add day restrictions.
No, if that was your intent,
That was the
that's what I
intent.
thinking.
So I had a question. In the prepared ordinance regulations, it does say 500 feet from any existing residence. Had we discussed 500 feet from any zoned residential?
I think we discussed both.
Okay.
So they're separate concepts, yeah, 500 feet from the border of any residential zone. And then also, I think it was discussed, but possibly by Commissioner Paula at the study session, the possibility of prescribing a distance from an existing residence. So say there's a residence in a commercial general, we have a distance from a residence like it's worded here, you would have to be that far away. However, that you're grandfathered in a sense that if somebody builds a house within 300 feet in a commercial general of a dispensary, you don't have to move.
And so the maps that we prepared for you were actually based off the zones, not necessarily off of a residence.
I'm not really sure what format we're taking today, but something that I did want to bring up, based on these prepared maps, which were a great tool. You know, on this maximum restrictions one, it says that there's 550 available parcels for these dispensaries to operate in. That doesn't necessarily take into account whether or not there's a structure on that property, if it's vacant land, or if it's even available for rent or for sale. So based on that, there's about a 5 to 7% vacancy rate for commercials in Clovis currently. That's usually what I use. So that would bring only 38 options for these businesses to go within the most restrictive, on that most restrictive map. Based on the second one, the medium, with 800 parcels, that would give 56 options, basing it on 7% vacancy rate. The minimum restrictions would bring it to 84 different options, and that's even if they are available in that specific district. Looking at that maximum restrictions, really Mabry is the only place that they're going to be able to locate. There's a few things around the hospital, but that's all owned by the hospital, and there's a few things by Walmart. But just driving back from work at lunch, I mean, there's nothing available in that area around Walmart right now. So, I mean, you're pretty much just restricting them to Mabry Drive.
And Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, and the other thing that it doesn't consider is the distance in between. We simply took the offset restrictions that were discussed during the joint study session and applied those. So theoretically, it may even be less if you started applying the offset distances in between the establishments.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison. Any other comments from the commission? Mr. Smith, I feel like I sense that you have something to say.
Not at this second, right now.
So I will go ahead and dive into the distances, which I think will probably end up being the biggest part of the discussion today, if I had to guess. And I'm going to piggyback on what Ms. Morrison is saying and echo what I said at the joint study session is, you know, the more restrictive we make this, the more difficult it is for businesses to open these establishments, ultimately pushing them into the county and the city and the municipality not receiving the benefit of the gross receipts tax. That being said, also echoing the mayor that night, is the safety of the citizenry and thinking of the public. With all that being said, I would throw out, again, to go more to the medium restriction, which would be 300 feet, which still is, you know, again, like you said, fairly restrictive at 56, I believe you said?
Yes.
56 locations. So I would put that out there, 300 foot on page, whatever that is here, where the section 3, A, B, C, and D, where it says 500 feet on each of those landmarks. I would definitely like to further discussion to change that to 300. And again, the other night, I thought it was an existing residence. It was going to be residential zone.
Correct. I think the zone is probably, from a regulatory standpoint, maybe easier to regulate versus than the residence itself, because when you start getting into mixed-use zones, you can have housing within a commercial general, then we'd have to go out and actually do the offsets and take a look at it. Not that we're not going to anyways. However, rather than just looking at the zones and from a business establishment, it may be easier to regulate based off zones, not off an actual residence.
And, I'm sorry, Commissioner, go ahead.
I was just thinking, the county don't have no zoning regulations. So whatever we decide here doesn't mean that the businesses are not gonna go to the county. So we just need to be careful as to how we're gonna set things up on this ordinance and how we're gonna restrict these businesses from operating here. But the fact of the matter remains the same. Businesses that don't want restrictions are gonna go to the county. And about the benefit of the tax that we collect from these businesses is gonna be offset with the traffic that we might get from Texas. But again, nothing is stating that businesses are not gonna move to the county because of the zoning regulations.
If I could interject, do we have any idea how much business this might be bringing in? We have no clue. Okay. I mean, I didn't know what kind of GRT we were actually looking at for this.
It's an unknown thing, but just given the facts that we're close to the border with Texas, it's gonna be a lot. Otherwise, we wouldn't have businesses looking into buying properties already in Clovis and farming. So that's gonna be a big boom for everybody, especially those involved in the business.
Any other comments, questions?
I'll throw it out there. I like living in Clovis because of the small town feel. It's big, but it's not. You know, you get to know people. And to me, 56 locations still seems like a bunch more establishments than what I would like to see, personally. I'm not going to say pro, I'm not going to say con, I just, because I know it's inevitable here. 56 just seems overboard for me, for what we have in our community. And like you said, they may go to the county regardless of what we say here. There's nothing we can predict. Just my thoughts.
If we're having the discussion about numbers, I mean, if we did look at that medium restriction, I mean, us as a commission, does anybody have any issues with the number on the medium restriction? On the medium restriction page?
The 800.
That's the 300 feet.
Yeah,
The 800 available parcels.
right. Which you said went down to 56, right? That's
Yeah,
what you were talking
based
about,
off- Yeah,
right?
for numbers.
Based on the standard vacancy rate.
Right.
For commercial.
I mean, I say we didn't have that at all, and we're setting aside, and we got 800 available parcels. I don't see 800 businesses being established.
I don't see 50, I don't see 56.
I don't see 56.
That's what
Yeah.
I don't have a good feeling with. I couldn't tell you.
Well, the market's going to drive that. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
you're not going to have 56 Taco Bells come open just because there's 56 parcels. So, because the demand is not there.
So I think if we went to the 300 all the way around on those numbers, do we still talk about the 500 or do we leave that alone? The 500 feet in between
In between
establishments.
dispensaries.
Yeah.
Well, my first thought was we needed to And I only brought that distance in, or 500, or whatever it is, so we wouldn't be so boom, 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 boom. But is that gonna happen? I don't know. I don't know. Kind of undecided on all this.
We got the email like a day ago. Is that not enough time? Like, I thought that was. I mean, are we, is that the heartburn that we're having over? I mean, like, if we said 300 all the way around, is anybody up here jumping up and down?
Now, keep in mind, commissioners, at the end of the day, this will be a recommendation. The city commission will vote on this. And that can be, I'm assuming that can be changed at that meeting, correct?
That is correct. Ultimately, this is just a recommendation to the city commission.
Just to clarify that out there, so.
You have 300 and 500 feet. That's not a lot of difference. I mean, 200 feet, but. I mean, that's 2/3 of a block.
Are you saying 300, you're saying keep the 300 and then do the 500 in between licensed dispensaries?
Yeah. All right. And so if we took this medium restriction, which is the 300 all the way around,
From
right?
landmarks.
Correct. Right. So away from schools, away from parks, churches, residential areas, and then if we do that, all the 300, do we keep the 500 in between establishments? Do we move that down to 300 as well? What are we looking at there?
Well, Mr. Howell, now, this doesn't even include, correct me if I'm wrong, earlier you said this doesn't include distance between establishments.
That is correct. This is just straight the offsets from landmarks.
In all zones?
Theoretically.
In all zones, correct?
Correct. In
Central
commercial,
business.
general, and industrial zones, it'd be allowed.
Okay.
I mean, the offsets apply to our residential zones.
I'm sorry, but central business district was not included in that?
Central Business District is included.
However, with your offsets, because your residential zones are right there next to your central business district,
Yes.
it pretty much
Pretty
takes
much
out your,
wipes that
it
out,
wipes
yeah.
out your central business district.
Because yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Howell.
Mr. Chairman, may I offer a couple of thoughts?
Yes, sir.
So, just kind of circling back to the study session, I just wanted to make sure that I said this again. You know, there's mixed opinions among municipal attorneys and the municipal league about whether or not we're even allowed to prescribe distances between other landmarks besides schools, i.e. churches, parks, et cetera. I mentioned that some municipalities, including Hobbs, I know for certain is going to go for it, but others are not. And I think the prevailing opinion is that we're probably not allowed to. But again, there's mixed opinions both ways. Something to consider is that if we go out on a limb and do this, if we stick with the 300 feet, which is in the medium restrictions, I think it gives us some more protection because they've already prescribed a 300-foot distance between schools and establishments in the statute, and I think there's a really good argument to be made that we shouldn't go beyond that if we're going to pick other landmarks because that's the maximum that they feel should be prescribed in the statute. I'm not saying I agree with that, but from a legal perspective, if we stuck to 300 or less, I think it would, to the extent that it can, I think it would shield us from a potential lawsuit.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. So really, ultimately what you're saying is as far as litigation risk, the 300 probably would put us in the safer spot.
Put us in a safer spot. Yep.
And really, we won't, again, like you said, most municipalities are not going to know until there's some sort of case law or judgment from the state.
I think I mentioned that I would assume the more restrictive municipalities will probably be the ones that get sued. Somebody's going to get sued, without question.
Thank you, Mr. Morris.
And also the distances between establishments, we have a lot of leeway there. We're not stuck to any number. They gave us, the only guidelines they gave us is it has to be reasonable. And so we are not stuck to the 300 number. We can come up with whatever.
So I would lean towards former chairman, Mr. Schmidt's comment of the 300, the medium zone,
Yeah.
with the 500 in between licensed dispensaries.
And just for clarification, in our definitions, we just said cannabis establishments. And so it's an umbrella for not only dispensaries, but also for producers. And so that that proposed 500 would apply to all cannabis establishments.
Even existing medical, or do they fall under a completely different licensing?
No, so they'll be grandfathered in, Mr. Chairman. So if they're already within 200 feet of each other, or they're already in a zone that we say now you can't be in, they're allowed to stay by statute.
Okay, thank you. I guess what I was saying is if they're already there as a medical dispensary, a new dispensary can't come in 300 feet from them.
Correct.
Just because they're currently a medical, because most likely most of them will become
Correct.
recreational dispensaries.
And in the ordinance, I left the definition of cannabis establishments as broad as possible, so it includes everything medicinal, everything retail, everything packaging, everything harvesting, everything cultivating and growing, it's all included.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Morris. Any further comments from the commission?
I just wonder what the trend is in some of these other municipalities that you say in Colorado, for instance. And I don't know because I don't frequent those places, but like Trinidad, for instance, that came up last week. Is there like a main thoroughfare that most of these set up on? Are they just all over the place, or like a shotgun? Or?
So most of the ones that I researched where there were no overlay districts created, they were just allowed to operate wherever they're, in the commercial, general, or industrial zone, or whatever zone. I noticed that some cities were more restrictive in their downtown areas and prescribed either greater distances or kept them out of downtown. But keep in mind that Colorado was given a huge amount of authority over licensing and regulating these establishments to local governments. So local governments can make up their own licensing regulations and reporting requirements and disposal regulations. That was sort of taken away from us. And they also gave the first thing I set out to do was try and find communities similarly situated to Clovis in Colorado, but they were given the option to opt out, and most of them opted out. So.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Morris, would it be possible, like, how do we need to do this as far as motions? Like, do we need to throw out a motion out there for 300 feet following the medium on the landmarks with a 500-foot in between, or?
To me, Mr. Chairman, it makes sense to figure out the zoning issue first, whether we're going to restrict them to just commercial, general, and industrial, as the maps contemplate, what we're going to do with the CBD, and whether or not we're going to abandon that and just create an overlay district and kind of group them in one area. I think we figure that out first, and then we can figure out the distances, is how it makes sense to me anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. All right, so we will move on to the next kind of item in the discussion here of the zoning. We'll open it up for that. Comments on that, commissioners?
Well, I think that what you just said, the way that this map is set up is the way that I see it. So, commercial, general, what was the other one? What was the last?
Commercial, general, industrial, and CBD are all included in these maps.
Okay.
And again, further referencing Mr. Howald's point, CBD is ultimately, for all intents and purposes, knocked out from just if we go with the 300, even the 300 footage, it still knocks it out because of the residential zones that surround that area. Correct, Mr. Howald?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay. That's what I propose.
Should we make a motion?
So I guess for the sake of discussion, I mean, if you would like to make a motion to allow them to only be authorized within commercial, general, and industrial zones, and then that gives us something to build off.
I'll make a motion.
Well, no, but are you making, just to clarify for the motion's sake, are you clarifying all three zones allowed?
Yes.
With the understanding that Central Business District, for all intents and purposes, with even the medium restrictions at 300 feet, is knocked out of play for these dispensaries.
Yes.
Okay, so would you please make that motion?
I'll make a motion to keep the zone within commercial, general, industrial,
And Central Business.
and central business district.
Second.
We get a roll call on that, or a vote. Thank
Commissioner
you, Commissioner
Garza,
Smith.
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Klein,
Yes.
Chairman North,
Yes.
Vice Chair Morrison,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. Thank you, Vicky. So now I think it would probably be safe to go into those footage and distances requirements within that. And again, to clarify, it would be, well, somebody can make the motion, obviously, on which one that they feel would be.
The density? Is that?
Yeah, we're going, so off of these maps, to clarify, the medium restriction, the 300 feet and then the 500 foot in between dispensaries and establishments is what we've discussed up to this point. Again, it is still open for discussion on the distances.
And so if you'd like to, for consideration also, is if you wanted to take them item by item specifically that we have laid out, from item A, B, C, D, you could certainly consider that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Law.
So on A, we can't adjust that one, correct? The 300 feet from schools?
We can't adjust it from the schools. I did group churches in there because that was my memory of what was thrown around last week. So we could prescribe a different distance for churches, but for schools, we're stuck with the 300 feet.
The 300 feet, once again, is a maximum.
Right.
Theoretically, you wanted to reduce it, it's certainly up to your
I'm
discretion.
sorry, yeah, we can definitely reduce it. We
Which
can't
is,
reduce it.
Right.
which is the first page of the maps, correct? The rally request, where it actually does change that.
300 feet from schools is still in there.
But 100 foot from churches and residential.
Oh, yeah.
Correct.
Well, I'd like to keep, personally, the 300 foot at least from churches.
So we're making a motion for a 300 feet from schools, 300 feet from parks, 300 feet from residential areas, 300 feet from churches, and 500 feet in between establishments, correct?
That's not a motion from me. I would like to keep them at least 300 feet from churches, if not
Yeah,
more.
that's what he said.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, basically, I think to confirm, Chairman, again, apparently you're going to be the chairman pretty soon. So,
He's going to have to wait.
300 feet on all landmarks, and then 500 feet from licensed establishments, under the definition of a cannabis establishment. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can I get a motion?
I make a motion for 300 feet, A, 300 feet residential areas, B, 300 feet from parks, C, 300 feet from schools, D, 300 feet from churches, and E, 500 feet from licensed establishments.
We have a motion. Can I get a second?
I'm sorry, I'm going to need clarification. I'm just not tuned in enough to, you're saying that the maximum from the church would be 300 feet?
Right.
Do we need more discussion on that? Does anybody else?
It's open.
Yeah, it's open. Yes, sir.
Anyone else have any concerns about a block away from a church or a religious institution?
I mean, I do. A minimum 300, which you say minimum, and everybody's going to be right there, as close as they can. I was fine with 500 before.
And so, Mr. Chairman, what I may recommend is separating out, currently we have churches, religious institutions, or places of worship lumped in with the schools, preschools, daycares, trade schools, and higher education facilities. And so what we could do, if you all want those to be separate, we can theoretically create another item here that just separates those out. So if you wanted to make 300 feet between the preschools and schools, you certainly could consider that, and then have another item that addresses churches and religious institutions and places of worship separately, as well as rehabilitation facilities.
I
Thank you,
guess I'm just thinking where the city may get some pushback from the public.
So are you wanting like 500 feet? Or what are we,
Well-
what numbers are we talking?
I'd be a little more comfortable with 500 feet. But that's me personally. I know the ordinance is, and I beat this dead horse last week, but I mentioned the packaged liquor sales in the ordinance there. What is the distance between the packaged liquors? But in churches, is it 300 or greater?
300.
It's 300.
We start getting something different, I can see it.
Yeah, so maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should include the churches at that distance, at the 300 feet distance. We're discussing here, so.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
No,
Thank
I
you,
agree.
Tom.
I think that we should leave it. I think we should leave it at the 300.
Yeah, if liquor's like that, then there's a lawsuit waiting to happen if we start changing it.
Then you have to be prepared to defend your positions, like 300 or 500 feet. Is that just a feel good? 500 feet? I don't know.
And just to clarify, Mr. Morris, the state statute, the reasonable, that's just in between establishments, correct?
And it also has to do with hours of operation, days of operation.
But not necessarily the locations from landmarks?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, then we can go back to Commissioner Smith's motion to include churches, religious institutions, and places of worship with the schools facilities.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. So for clarification's sakes, on the motion that is now still available, 300 feet from all mentioned landmarks that are in the draft, with 500 feet in between licensed cannabis establishments. Within and this is within the 3 zones: Central Business District, Commercial General, and Industrial.
Correct, and so just maybe for some assistance,
Thank you.
based off the draft ordinance that was passed out, under A would remain 300, B would become 300, C would be 500, D would become 300.
Perfect, thank you.
And of course, we would add rehabilitation facilities to A as well.
Thank you, thank you.
Could I ask council's question on, a question? If you think that it would behoove us, I guess, to decrease them all to, well, never mind. Never mind, that was a silly question. I was gonna say on the density, if it would be better to have it at 300, but we have full reign on that. Okay.
I guess it's in this one.
So the motion still is on the floor, and I think it's been clarified pretty well at this point. Can I have a second to that motion?
I second the motion, and I have a question to council. This is still going to be an introduction. The ordinance is just going to be an introduction for 30 days, so we will have people comment on that, and if we need to make any more changes, that we can at that time.
Correct, before
As long
final
as they're within the rules and regulations from.
Yes, sir, correct.
Yeah, I mean, again, to clarify, we're a recommendation. The city commissioners will make the ultimate decision.
Well, at this time, do we want to take comment from the people that are here to make comment?
I think that
Before
would
we
be,
move on this?
It's too late. They're always welcome to say something, whoever is.
thank you. Yes, Commissioner Smith, got it right that time. Is there anybody that would, anybody from the public section that would like to make any comments in reference to what we've already discussed? Fantastic. And is there anybody dialed in that we need to? Okay, awesome. So again, the motion stands and seconded. Can we get a roll call, please?
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Klein,
Yes.
Chairman North,
Yes.
Vice Chair Morrison,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Garza.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes. Now, are there any other further items to discuss that the commissioners would like to bring forward? Yes, please,
Chairman,
Mr.
I
Wall.
would recommend approving the text amendment as presented with those changes now at this point with regards to the rest of the language that's in there.
Fantastic.
And Mr. Chairman, there may be discussion on subsections E, F, G, H, I, and J
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
still.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that we were, I was going to say further discussion outside of those 2 points that we've already referenced.
I do have a question on off-premise advertising. Does medicinal marijuana allowed to advertise off-premise?
So I'm unsure currently what the state statute allows them to do, but under the beginning July 1, when the Cannabis Act took effect, they now have to abide by that, and so they're allowed to advertise on premises, and we can't restrict that any differently than we restrict another business, but we can now prohibit and regulate off-premises advertising if we want. So the state statute says we can't interfere with their attached signs, their freestanding signs on their property. It's silent on whether we can prohibit their advertising or signs other places, so I think we can.
Okay. I was just worried about what's out there right now.
And
Like
I'm
what they're
unsure
able
if we were able to, but we don't, our current sign code doesn't prohibit any sort of cannabis advertising, and we're in the process of revamping that. But whatever the law was before July 1, after July 1, I know that we are now allowed to prohibit and limit off-premises advertising.
And on that note, Mr. Morris, there's also, within the statute, there's guidelines on the type and style of on-site signage, correct?
So those are some of the guidelines, Mr. Chairman, that the Department of, I can't remember the acronym, but RLD is coming up with. I believe they're meeting in September, and there's a ton of other licensing issues and waste disposal issues and advertising issues that they need to clean up.
That obviously all municipalities will follow under state statute.
Correct.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or points that the commissioners would like to discuss within the draft?
The only one I've gone back over and over is J, the hours. But again, then I roll back to alcohol served, or you can buy it those hours, and are we opening ourselves up? There were some points brought up last time that the traffic it's going to create if it's open later, the pedestrians. So I thought to myself that we should have a sooner closing than 8 o'clock. That's the only points I'm basing off is maybe traffic and pedestrians. I don't have anything else.
And Mr. Morris, just to further that discussion point, what are our, is that pretty open for us to decide? I mean, can we do Sunday until X time and then Saturday, Monday, whatever? Can we change day-to-day hours?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, it's pretty wide open. So we have to have some sort of rationale or reasoning that it does not include, we just dislike marijuana. And so it has to be related to traffic or pedestrians or safety or children so we have, basically unfettered discretion, but we have to have some sort of rationale behind it.
Thank you, Mr. Morris.
And it has to be reasonable.
Having said that, I just thought about it. School hours, when school starts, 8 o'clock is mama dropping the kids and going to the dispensary right at 8 o'clock. I find that a little problematic for me to understand, but it's possible. It's not, nothing is impossible at this time to exclude. I'd rather have 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. for that reason only.
Except in the summer.
Some of the summer, where they can do whatever they want, but still, it's open all day, they can get their fix, whatever, at any time.
Probably not awake yet.
I can move 9 to 8. If anybody else wants to chime in on that one.
We were talking about reasons why earlier some of these would-be businesses move to the county, and maybe perhaps that's one of them, restricted hours in the city.
Mr. Morris, if this is drafted as passed, whichever direction we end up going, I'm assuming that it can be readdressed at a later date, and just like any of our ordinances. So let's say we did move it to, let's say we left it 8 to 8, and we find that that doesn't work, that mama is dropping off the child and going to get weed, which again is speculative, just like it's speculative to say that they're going to be pushed out to the county or not. But we could change that at a later date, correct?
Correct. We can change basically everything in E through J at a later time. We can't make any changes later that will force a business to move.
They'd be grandfathered in at that time,
But, so we can't make we can make distance changes, but it will,
once they're there.
once they're there, it won't affect the existing cannabis establishments. And again, E through J, there's some question about whether we're allowed to prescribe those types of regulations. However, I feel really safe after researching all the other cities that I did, and I was given kind of some assurance from RLD that the state, although they haven't prescribed regulations yet, will adopt regulations that are very much in line with this. And so I feel comfortable that we'll be okay adopting E through J. But I did want to point out that there's definitely some opinions that we don't have the ability to tell them you have to have surveillance or you can't have odors emanating from your facility. However, I believe that whenever they get their ducks in a row and the regulations are put forth at the end of this year, that these will all be included in some form or fashion.
Thank you. And Ms. Morris, back to the time, I'm pretty clueless as to this question, obviously, but is there a restriction on the time that somebody can go get the medicinal marijuana right now from a medical dispensary?
I'm unsure.
Thank you.
That's gonna go away though, because you can still get to the dispensary and claim that that's medicinal.
I understand. I was going down a different line there. I was referencing your point, but.
And just to clarify that mom dropping the kids at school, it can be done by daddy too. So I see more moms dropping the kids off than the dads, so, but it can happen to both.
Do we move it to 9-8 or want to keep it 8-8?
I like 9 o'clock better than 8 a.m.
And for point of order, that you do have a motion on the floor to change it to 9 to 8, I believe. Commissioner Smith made
Is that an official motion?
And a point of clarification on this, under J, it says 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., but we're proposing to change that from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Then we got Mountain Daylight Time. Should we just change that to Mountain Time? Okay.
Yes, hopefully someday they'll change that also.
Yeah, that's right. Can we do that next?
I don't think that's underneath your authority.
Changing the world one day at a time.
So we do have a motion for 9 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Second.
And a roll call.
Commissioner Klein,
Yes.
Chairman North,
Yes.
Vice Chair Morrison,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Garza,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes. Commissioners, any more points, questions, discussion on any of the other possible parts that we can change for the city? So, Mr. Morris, it looks like there is no other further questions. I will again open up to the floor for the public. Is there any comments or questions from anyone? Okay, fantastic. And then, just for a point of clarification, Mr. Holt, Mr. Morris, do we need to make a motion for all those changes, or are we good on where we're at, where we stand, and we pass this recommendation?
Are we make a motion to
Accept the text amendment with the proposed changes.
Okay,
make a motion that,
there is a motion on the floor.
Second.
Get a roll call, please.
Chairman North,
Yes.
Vice Chair Morrison,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Garza,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
yes.
and Commissioner Klein.
Yes.
The motion passes. So we will send this recommendation to the City Commission. And I believe there is no other items on the agenda today. Mr. Bryant?
Yes.
It was changed to residential zone, so 300 feet from a residential zone.
Yes, sir, thank you. No further questions, no other items on the agenda. I believe that is it.
And so, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, this will be presented to the city commission at their next upcoming meeting, July the 15th, for introduction of the ordinance, and then for adoption of the ordinance 30 days later. So the second meeting in August will be up for final adoption.
Perfect, thank you, Mr. Howalt. For the good of the order, is there anything for the good of the order? There being no further business to discuss, we are adjourned. Thank you.